Hello, Steve White here, and thank you for joining us here in the studio. And I'd firstly like to say a big thank you for all the positivity regarding our little trip through the rudiments that we've been doing over the past weeks and months. I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it. But now I'm sure you're ready to know where we're going to take all this lovely practice that we've been doing. So what we're going to look at now is putting the rudiments onto the drum kit, hopefully in as musical a fashion as is possible. So many great drummers use the rudiments, sticking patterns, paradiddles and inverted paradiddles and reverse paradiddles in a very, very musical way. People like Steve Gadd, people like Dave Weckl, any of the great drummers, they're using patterns that we practice on the practice pad and applying them to the drum set. It's a really kind of very basic thing that us drummers do. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to play the paradiddle. We're just going to play the paradiddle between the snare drum and the hi-hat. This isn't all really choppy, kind of fantastic sort of blasting stuff. It's all fairly basic, and we can take it up to a level that sounds sort of impressive and sounds hopefully musical. That's the most important thing. So the first thing we're going to do is take the paradiddle, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. And we're going to play it between the hi-hat and the snare drum, which gives it a slightly different texture. Now the idea is to get a nice consistent feel between the hi-hat and the snare drum, and then we're going to bring in the bass drum with some different variations. I have 6 favoured variations that I like to use, which really help to develop coordination and independence between the 3 limbs. Now, the first one that I'm going to demonstrate is very, very simple. It's just the bass drum on beats 1 and 3, which sounds like this. Fairly simple. The next one is slightly more developed in that we're going to play the bass drum on all 4 beats of the bar. The next one, we're going to use a fairly standard rock beat type bass drum pattern. The bass drum is going to be on beat 1 and it's going to be on beat 3 and beat 3 and. So if I'm just playing a conventional rock rhythm, it'll sound like this. But what we're going to do is we're going to play the paradiddle over the top of that bass drum rhythm, which sounds like this. And the next one is slightly more tricky. We're going to play a unison pattern with the hi-hat and the bass drum playing together and the left hand just playing the snare drum. Sounds like this. Now, many of you will know my fascination and love of Latin American music and all of the influences from the south of America and the Caribbean. So I'm going to introduce a couple of little inflections and tributes to the essentially firstly samba and then New Orleans music. So the first bass drum pattern over the paradiddle is a samba bass drum pattern, which is repeated and sounds like this. And then last but not least, the paradiddle is going to be played between the hi-hat and the snare drum, and I'm going to play a 3-beat clave, a kind of second line New Orleans influenced bass drum, which sounds like this. Now I'm going to put them all together, but I'm going to play them with the metronome. So I'm going to play 4 bars of each and move between the different bass drum patterns and join them all together. So now I'm ready with my cans on and my click track, and I'm going to play the first sequence of paradiddles with the bass drum variations at 70 beats per minute. So it's quite slow, but it's really good to kind of work on the deliberate placement of the notes, which as you take it faster makes it sound musical. So here we go at 70 beats per minute. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So that was at 70 BPM, and I changed the bass drum pattern every 4 bars. I've taken the tempo up to 90 beats per minute, which give yourself time. Don't sort of try to cram it in as fast as possible. Just relax on it and just take the tempo up gradually. So this is the same thing, exactly the same thing, but at 90 BPM. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and. Okay, that was 90 BPM. I've taken the tempo up again to 120, which now is motoring a little bit and sounds pretty funky when you put it all together. So, as I say, take your time, there's no rush, just build it up a little bit every day, practice regularly and often. Focus, work your tempos out. I always used to keep a little practice diary of tempos when I was playing stuff so that I wasn't just fishing about with no real idea about where my progress was going when I was practicing rudiments or stuff around the drums. It's just stuff to think about. Okay, so these are the same patterns, 4 bars each, 120 BPM. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So there you have it. The paradiddle played between snare drum and hi-hat, and 6 different variations on the bass drum at 3 different tempos. Take it slow, be focused when you practice, don't expect miracles overnight, and above all, keep it funky.